This tutorial is for 4th grade, Module 6, Lesson 10. In this lesson, we're going to shade in area models to help us compare decimals. The first two decimals I'm comparing are 23 hundredths and 4 tenths. I can also look at 23 hundredths as 2 tenths and 3 hundredths. In order to shade that in on the area model, I would shade in 2 columns for the 2 tenths. But in my third column, I need to break this into hundredths so I can shade in 3 hundredths. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. If I break it into 10 pieces, then I will shade in 3 of those. Each piece would be considered 1/100th because it would take 100 of the pieces to make the whole. So I'll go ahead and shade that in. I'll shade in 2 columns and 3 of the hundredths. And I'll also shade in 4 tenths on the second area model to show this decimal. And then once they are shaded in, it'll be easier to see which decimal is greater. So this is what 2 tenths and 3 hundredths looks like once it's been shaded in, comparing that to 4 tenths. And you can see that 4 tenths is much greater than 2 tenths and 3 hundredths, or 23 hundredths. So 23 hundredths is less than 4 tenths. Moving on to the next question, we have 6 tenths. That means I'll just shade in 6 of the columns because each column is 1/10. And we're comparing that to 3 tenths and 8 hundredths. So I'll shade in 3 of the columns to show the 3 tenths, but again I will need to divide a column into hundredths so I can show the 8 hundredths. So I'll divide this into hundredths, and I'll shade in 8 of those along with the 3 tenths to show the comparison. And now that both are shaded in, you can see that 6 tenths is much greater than 38 hundredths, or 3 tenths and 8 hundredths. In the next section, we're going to locate and label the points for each of the decimal numbers on the number line, and then we'll fill in the blank with greater than, less than, or equal to in order to compare the decimal numbers. Now, let's look at our numbers first. So we have 10 and 3 hundredths, and we're comparing that to 10 and 3 tenths. Now let's look carefully at our number line. It starts with 10. The next number is 10 and 1/10. So that means each of these sections is 1/100th. Since we've taken the distance between 10 and 10 and 1/10 and divided that into 10 pieces. So each of these is 1/100th. So we need to keep that in mind when we plot our decimal numbers. So first we need to plot 10 and 3 hundredths. Well, here's my 10, and then each of these is 100th, so here would be 1/100th, 2 hundredths, 3 hundredths. So this point is 10 and 3 hundredths. Now we need to find 10 and 3 tenths. Well, again, we started off with 10. We went to 10 and 1/10, 10 and 2 tenths, and 10 and 3 tenths. So 10 and 3 tenths is found on the other side of the number line, which means that 10 and 3 tenths is greater than 10 and 3 hundredths, or 10 and 3 hundredths is less than 10 and 3 tenths. Let's look at another example. This time we're comparing 12 and 68 hundredths to 12 and 8 tenths. Looking at the number line, I see that we go from 12 and 6 tenths to 12 and 7 tenths. Again, that means that each of these sections is 1/100th. So we'll keep that in mind as we plot our points. So 12 and 68 hundredths is the same as 12 and 6 tenths and 8 more hundredths. Well, here's 12 and 6 tenths. I need to hop 8 hundredths past it. So 1/100th, 2 hundredths, 3 hundredths, 4 hundredths, 5 hundredths, 6 hundredths, 7 hundredths, 8 hundredths. This point is 12 and 68 hundredths. Or another way to look at it, 12 and 6 tenths and 8 hundredths. Now let's plot that against 12 and 8 tenths. 12 and 8 tenths is found here on the number line. That's this point. Because it is further to the right on the number line, that means that 12 and 8 tenths is greater than 12 and 68 hundredths. So we'll mark that. 12 and 68 hundredths is less than 12 and 8 tenths. In the next section, we're going to make these same types of comparisons without the use of area models or number lines. For my first problem, I'm comparing 3 and 42 hundredths to 3 and 75 hundredths. I'm going to start by comparing their whole numbers first. They both have 3 for their whole numbers. So now I'm going to move to my tenths. The first number has 4 tenths, and I'm comparing that to a number with 7 tenths. It doesn't matter how many hundredths they have after this. 7 tenths is much greater than the 4 tenths. Another way we can look at this is this number is 42 hundredths, and we're comparing that against 75 hundredths. 75 hundredths would be greater. So 3 and 42 hundredths is less than 3 and 75 hundredths. In question B, I'm comparing 4 and 21 hundredths to 4 and 12 hundredths. Again, we'll start by comparing their whole numbers. Those are the same. When I compare the tenths, I can see that the first number has 2 tenths, while the second number has only 1 tenth. So that means this number is going to be bigger. And again, another way to look at it is this number has 21 hundredths compared to the second number, which only has 12 hundredths. So the first number is bigger. In question C, I have 2 and 15 hundredths compared to 3 and 15 hundredths. If I start by comparing my whole numbers, 2 is less than 3. So it doesn't matter what's on the decimal side of the number. 3 wholes is always going to be greater than 2 wholes. So 2 and 15 hundredths is less than 3 and 15 hundredths. And my last problem is 4 and 4 hundredths compared to 6 and 2 hundredths. I have 4 for my whole number here, while I have 6 here. So it doesn't matter that I have less hundredths in my second number than in my first number, because 6 wholes automatically makes this number the greater number. So 4 and 4 hundredths is less than 6 and 2 hundredths. And in our last section, we're going to compare numbers written in a variety of different forms. The first problem is 23 tenths, and we're comparing it to 2 and 3 tenths. Well, 23 tenths is the same as 2 wholes and 3 tenths, which can also be written as 2 and 3 tenths in decimal form. So that means that these two numbers are the same. So 23 tenths is equal to 2 and 3 tenths. Going across, we have 1 and 4 hundredths, and we're comparing it to 1 and 4 tenths. In decimal form, 1 and 4 tenths would look like this. Well, they both have 1 as a whole number, but now we're comparing 4 tenths against 4 hundredths. 4 tenths would be greater than 4 hundredths, so the second number is the larger number. 1 and 4 hundredths is less than 1 and 4 tenths. The next problem is 6 and 7 hundredths, and we're comparing it to 6 and 7 tenths. I can write this as a fraction, so 6 and 7 hundredths compared to 6 and 7 tenths. 7 tenths would be greater than 7 hundredths, so 6 and 7 hundredths is less than 6 and 7 tenths. In the next problem, I would read this decimal as 45 hundredths. So 45 hundredths, and I'm comparing it to 45 tenths. Well, 45 tenths would be the same as 4 wholes and 5 tenths. So that's obviously larger than 45 hundredths because of those whole numbers. So 45 hundredths is less than 45 tenths. In the next problem, I have 127 hundredths, and I'm comparing it to 1 and 72 hundredths. Well, 127 hundredths is the same thing as 1 whole and 27 hundredths. Both numbers have 1 whole, but let's compare the 27 hundredths to the 72 hundredths. 72 would be larger. So 1 and 27 hundredths, or 127 hundredths, is less than 1 and 72 hundredths. And my last question is 6 tenths, and I can write that as a decimal, 6 tenths. We're comparing that to 66 hundredths. I would write that as a decimal this way. Well, neither one has a whole number. If we compare their tenths, they both have 6 tenths. The first number does not have any hundredths, while the second number has 6 hundredths, so that makes the second number larger. 6 tenths is less than 66 hundredths.